Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm explaining the 15 most banned books in history in just 15 minutes. These are the books that were so dangerous. They got banned in countries, burned in public squares, and even got their authors threatened with death. But here's the crazy part. The more they tried to ban them, the more people wanted to read them. Right now on screen, the 15 most controversial books ever written. Let's dive in. Publication date and genre. It is Salman Rushdie's fourth novel, published in 1988. Written in the magical realism style, it is an epic work that explores the lives of two Indian Muslim immigrants in England, their identity crises, and fantastical transformations. Main themes and controversial elements. The novel examines migration, religion, and modernity through its two main characters, Jibril Farishta and Saladin Chamcha. The biggest controversy stems from its reinterpretation of the apocryphal Islamic legend known as the Satanic Verses. It includes satirical and fictional scenes about the life of Prophet Muhammad, referred to as Mahund in the book. The major controversy, the Rushdie affair. The book was seen as blasphemous by many Muslims. In 1989, Iranian leader Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa calling for the deaths of Rushdie and his publishers. This led to widespread protests, book burnings, bombings, and violence. Rushdie was forced to live in hiding for years. Impact and bans. The novel was banned in many countries, including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. In 2022, Rushdie was seriously wounded in an assassination attempt in New York. The work has become a global symbol of the freedom of expression debate. Literary value. It received widespread critical acclaim and was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It is regarded as one of Rushdie's most famous and influential novels. It deeply questions themes of religion, migration, and storytelling. Publication date and genre. It is a dystopian novel written by English author George Orwell and published in June 1949. It is considered one of the most influential works of 20th century literature and one of the cornerstones of the dystopian genre. Plot and story. The story is set in the year 1984 in a fictional superstate called Oceania. The protagonist, Winston Smith, is a low-ranking official who works at the Ministry of Truth, rewriting historical records to match the party's current version of events. He secretly falls in love with Julia and begins to rebel against the totalitarian regime. Main themes. The novel explores extreme totalitarianism, government surveillance, propaganda, censorship, and the complete destruction of individual freedom. Concepts such as Big Brother, thought crime, doublethink, and newspeak were introduced in this book. Historical context and inspiration. Orwell wrote the book between 1947 and 1948. Right after World War II, it was heavily influenced by Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany. As a democratic socialist, Orwell aimed to warn against authoritarianism from both the political left and right. Cultural impact and bans. The novel has had an enormous global impact. Terms like Orwellian, Big Brother, and thought police are now commonly used worldwide to describe oppressive governments and surveillance states. It remains highly relevant today in discussions about privacy, fake news, and state control. Bans. It was officially banned in the Soviet Union from the 1950s until 1988 and heavily restricted in Eastern Bloc countries. Even today, it is banned or strictly controlled in countries such as North Korea, Cuba, Vietnam, and Belarus. In the United States, although never nationally banned, it has been frequently challenged or removed from school curricula and libraries in various states. For example, in Florida's Jackson County in 1981. Publication date and genre. It is a satirical novella written by George Orwell and first published in August 1945 in England. Orwell himself called it a fairy story. It is a sharp political allegory that uses farm animals to represent real historical events. Plot and story. The animals on Manor Farm rise up against their cruel human owner, Mr. Jones, and take control of the farm. They rename it Animal Farm and create the 7 commandments of animalism. Over time, the pigs, especially Napoleon, seize all power, and the revolution turns into a new dictatorship. Main themes. The book is about the corruption of power, totalitarianism, class struggle, and how revolutions can be betrayed by their leaders. The most famous line is, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." Historical context and inspiration. Orwell wrote it during World War II, finished in 1944. It is a direct allegory of the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the rise of Stalin. Orwell, a democratic socialist, wanted to show how communist ideals can turn into tyranny. Cultural impact and bans. One of the most famous political satires in history. The phrase, "some animals are more equal than others," is still used today to describe hypocrisy and power. Bans. It was banned for decades in the Soviet Union, all Eastern Bloc countries, China, Cuba, North Korea, and Albania, because it openly criticized Stalin and communism. It has also been challenged or removed from school libraries in the US and some Western countries for being anti-communist. Publication date and genre. Written by Russian-American author Vladimir Nabokov, and first published in 1955 in Paris by Olympia Press, because American and British publishers refused it due to its controversial content. It is a dark, satirical literary novel narrated by an unreliable protagonist. Plot and story. The story is told by Humbert Humbert, a middle-aged literature professor with a disturbing obsession for nymphets, young girls. He becomes fixated on 12-year-old Dolores Hayes, whom he calls Lolita. After her mother's death, he takes her on a cross-country road trip across America while manipulating and abusing her. Main themes. The novel explores obsession, pedophilia, the unreliability of the narrator, the clash between art and morality, and a sharp critique of American consumer culture. Nabokov presents it as a tragic love story through Humbert's twisted perspective, forcing readers to question morality and beauty. Historical context and inspiration. Nabokov wrote the book in English while living in the United States. He drew from his own experiences as an émigré and his fascination with language and psychology. The novel was extremely controversial upon release because of its explicit subject matter involving child sexual abuse, cultural impact and bans. Lolita is now considered a literary classic and one of the most important novels of the 20th century. It has sold over 50 million copies and was adapted into famous films, 1962 by Stanley Kubrick and 1997 by Adrian Lyne. Bans. It was banned in France, 1956-1958, the United Kingdom, Argentina, New Zealand, South Africa, and several other countries for obscenity. In the United States, it was never nationally banned, but has been repeatedly challenged and removed from school libraries and reading lists for its sexual content. Publication date and genre. Published in April 1939 by American author John Steinbeck. It is a realist epic novel and one of the most important works of 20th century American literature, often regarded as the definitive novel of the Great Depression. Plot and story. The novel follows the Joad family, poor Oklahoma tenant farmers who lose their land due to the Dust Bowl and bank foreclosures. They pack their belongings into an old truck and head to California on Route 66, hoping for work and a better life, but encounter starvation, exploitation, and police brutality. Main themes. It powerfully depicts the exploitation of migrant workers, corporate greed, the failure of the American dream, class struggle, human dignity, and the unbreakable spirit of the poor. The famous ending scene with Rose of Sharon is one of the most shocking and symbolic moments in American literature. Historical context and inspiration. Steinbeck based the book on his own reporting for the San Francisco News about the real-life suffering of Dust Bowl migrants in California. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 1940 and helped shape public opinion about migrant workers' rights, cultural impact, and bans. It is considered one of the greatest American novels ever written and was adapted into a classic 1940 film by John Ford. Bans. Immediately banned or burned in many places, especially in California and Oklahoma, for being communist propaganda, vulgar, and obscene. It was banned in Kern County, California, where the story is set, several school districts in the U.S., and even in some libraries in the Soviet Union, ironically, for being too critical of capitalism. It is still occasionally challenged or removed from school reading lists today. Publication date and genre. Published in 1932 by English author Aldous Huxley. It is a dystopian novel and one of the most important works of 20th century literature, famous for its sharp satire on science, technology and consumer society. Plot and story. The story is set in a futuristic world state in the year 2540, AF 632. People are genetically engineered in test tubes, conditioned from birth and kept happy with the drug soma. The main character, Bernard Marx, takes a savage named John, who grew up on a reservation, into this perfect but soulless society, leading to chaos and tragedy. Main themes. The novel explores the dangers of a totally controlled society, the loss of individuality, the price of happiness without freedom, consumerism, and how technology can destroy humanity. Huxley shows a world where people are happy, but no longer truly human. Historical context and inspiration. Huxley wrote the book after visiting America and seeing the rise of mass production, advertising, and the beginnings of genetic science. He was warning against both communism and American-style capitalism. It was written just before Hitler came to power and only 12 years after the Russian Revolution. Cultural impact and bans. It is now considered a classic dystopian novel, alongside 1984. It has sold millions of copies and influenced countless films, TV series, and thinkers. The phrases "Brave New World" and "Soma" are still used today. Bans. Banned or challenged in many U.S. schools and libraries for sexual content, anti-family and anti-religion themes. It was also banned in some countries during the Cold War for being too critical of both capitalism and totalitarianism. Publication date and genre. Written by Adolf Hitler while in prison after the failed beer hall putsch, and published in 2 volumes, 1925 and 1926. It is an autobiographical political manifesto that serves as the foundational text of Nazi ideology, combining autobiography, propaganda, and extreme anti-Semitism. Plot and story. Hitler describes his childhood in Austria, his time as a soldier in World War I, his political awakening in Munich, and his hatred toward Jews, Marxists, and democracy. He outlines his vision for a greater Germany and the need for Lebensraum, living space, in the East. Main themes: extreme racial anti-Semitism, the superiority of the Aryan race, anti-communism, the rejection of democracy, and the idea that Germany must expand by conquering territory from inferior races. It is Hitler's clearest and most open expression of his worldview. Historical context and inspiration. Hitler wrote the book in Landsberg prison in 1924. Initially it sold poorly, but after he became chancellor in 1933, it became a bestseller in Germany. Millions of copies were printed, and it was given to newlyweds and soldiers as a state gift. Cultural impact and bans. It became the ideological Bible of the Nazi Party and directly inspired many of their policies, including the Holocaust. After 1945, it was widely banned or heavily restricted in many countries. Bans. Banned in Germany until 2016, when copyright expired. Still banned or strictly controlled in Austria, France, Russia, Canada, and several other countries. Many editions are annotated today to show its role in promoting hatred and genocide. Publication date and genre. Written by Anne Frank between 1942 and 1944 while hiding from the Nazis. First published in Dutch in 1947 as Het Achterhuis, The Secret Annex. It is a real-life diary and one of the most powerful eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust, now considered a classic of world literature. Plot and story. 13-year-old Jewish girl Anne Frank writes about her life in a secret annex in Amsterdam with her family and 4 other Jews, hiding from the German occupation during World War II. She records her fears, dreams, family conflicts, first love, and hopes for the future while living in extreme fear and isolation. Main themes: the cruelty of war and persecution, the loss of innocence, the power of hope and imagination, growing up under extreme pressure, and the universal human desire for freedom and dignity. Historical context and inspiration. Anne received the diary as a birthday gift on her 13th birthday in 1942. The family hid for 25 months until they were betrayed and arrested in August 1944. Anne died of typhus in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in 1945. At age 15, her father Otto was the only survivor and published the diary. Cultural impact and bans. It has sold over 30 million copies, been translated into more than 70 languages, and is required reading in schools worldwide. It became a global symbol against fascism and anti-Semitism. Bans. Despite its importance, it has been banned or challenged in many U.S. schools for sexual content. Anne writes about puberty and her body, and for being too depressing. It was also banned in some countries during the Cold War, and is still occasionally removed from reading lists today. Publication date and genre. First published on February 2, 1922 in Paris by Shakespeare & Company. It is a groundbreaking modernist novel, famous for its revolutionary stream of consciousness technique and experimental style, plot, and story. The entire novel takes place on a single day, June 16, 1904, in Dublin. It follows 3 main characters: Leopold Bloom, a Jewish advertising canvasser, his wife Molly Bloom, and young Stephen Dedalus. The story is loosely based on Homer's Odyssey but set in modern, everyday life. Main themes: the heroism of ordinary people, sexuality, Irish nationalism and identity, religion, alienation, marriage, and the inner workings of the human mind through incredibly complex language and style. Historical context and inspiration. James Joyce spent 7 years writing it while living in exile in Europe. The book was considered extremely shocking because of its explicit sexual scenes and strong language. Cultural impact and bans. Now regarded as one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. June 16th is celebrated worldwide as Bloomsday. Bans. Banned for obscenity in the United States until the famous 1933 court case, and in the United Kingdom until 1936. Copies were burned in several countries, including Ireland and the US. Publication date and genre. Published in 1960 by American author Harper Lee. It is a Southern Gothic novel and a coming-of-age story set in the 1930s American South, dealing with serious themes through the eyes of a child. Plot and story. The story is narrated by Scout Finch, a young girl in the fictional town of Macomb, Alabama. Her father, lawyer Atticus Finch, defends a black man named Tom Robinson, who is falsely accused of raping a white woman. Scout and her brother Jem learn about racism, justice, and morality while growing up. Main themes: racial injustice, moral growth. Empathy. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. The loss of innocence, and the hypocrisy of society. Historical context and inspiration. Harper Lee based the novel partly on her own childhood in Alabama and the real-life Scottsboro Boys case. It was published during the Civil Rights Movement and became an immediate bestseller. Cultural impact and bans. Won the Pulitzer Prize in 1961. It is one of the most widely read American novels and is frequently assigned in schools. The 1962 film starring Gregory Peck as Atticus is also a classic. Bans. Despite its anti-racism message, it has been challenged and banned in many U.S. schools for racial language, profanity, and promoting racial tension. Publication date and genre. Published in 1951 by American author J.D. Salinger. It is a classic coming-of-age novel written in a distinctive first-person voice with colloquial, rebellious language, plot, and story. The story follows 16-year-old Holden Caulfield, who has just been expelled from his prep school. He wanders around New York City for a few days, narrating his thoughts on phoniness, childhood innocence, and his own alienation while avoiding going home. Main themes: teenage angst, loss of innocence, the search for authenticity in a phony adult world, loneliness, depression, and the difficulty of growing up. Historical context and inspiration. Salinger drew from his own experiences as a teenager and his time in the Army during World War II. The book became an instant bestseller and a voice for post-war youth disillusionment, cultural impact, and bans. One of the most influential novels of the 20th century. It has sold over 65 million copies and inspired countless writers and musicians. Holden Caulfield is an iconic literary anti-hero. Bans repeatedly banned or challenged in U.S. schools and libraries for profanity, sexual content, undermining authority, and being anti-family. It was even linked to several high-profile assassinations and attempts, e.g., Mark David Chapman, John Hinckley. Publication date and genre. The series began with Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in 1997, UK, and ended with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in 2007. It is a fantasy young adult series with 7 books, blending magic, coming of age, and epic adventure. Plot and story. Orphaned wizard Harry Potter discovers he is famous in the wizarding world. He attends Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, makes friends, Ron and Hermione, and battles the dark wizard Lord Voldemort, who killed his parents and wants to rule both worlds. Main themes: good versus evil, friendship, courage, the power of love, prejudice and discrimination, blood status, house elves, etc., loss, and growing up while facing real-world issues like racism and authoritarianism. Historical context and inspiration. J.K. Rowling wrote the first book while on welfare as a single mother. The series became a global phenomenon during the rise of the internet and social media, creating the biggest fandom in history. Cultural impact and bans. Sold over 600 million copies. Translated into 85+ languages, turned into 8 blockbuster films, theme parks, and a massive franchise. It made J.K. Rowling one of the richest authors ever. Bans. Challenged and banned in many U.S. schools and countries for witchcraft, occult themes, anti-Christian, and later for Rowling's views on gender issues. Still one of the most frequently challenged series in the 21st century.